Hello, students. Welcome to the session on The Burning of the Books by Bertolt Brecht. Bertolt Brecht was a German poet, playwright, novelist, humorist, essayist, theatre director, and songwriter. He is known basically as a playwright because he introduced a new form of theatre into, into the uh, theatre arts. He He was the one who pioneered the modern epic theatre with its alienation effect. Alienation effect is otherwise called as the distancing effect or the estrangement effect, where a person uh, does not identify with the character and the person knows very, very well where to cut his feelings of identification with the character on the stage. So Bertolt Brecht was the one who introduced this alienation effect in the modern epic theatre. And he is also highly regarded for his poetry and for his plays such as Antigone, Saint Joan of Stockyards, Life of Galileo, Mother Courage and Children, The Three Penny Opera, Edward II, Baal, In the Jungle, and Drums in the Night. And he is also known for the lyrics of the song Mac the Knife. Brecht was someone who underwent a lot of Nazi persecution. He fled Germany in 1933 when Hitler assumed power. A number of Brecht's poems were written from the perspective of a man who sees his country becoming increasingly fascist, xenophobic, and militaristic. For example, the first poem was written by Brecht about the Nazi book burnings orchestrated by Hitler's propaganda uh, Mr. Joseph Goebbels. The Nazis burned the books of writers they considered to be decadent, including those of Thomas Mann, Ernest Hemingway, and even Helen Keller. Also, among the books that were burned were those of the German Jewish poet Heinrich Heine, who, in his 1820-1821 play, accurately predicted where they burn books, they will also ultimately burn people. So, this poem that we are going to look at, The Burning of the Books, is about this particular instance that happened in Germany. This is the picture of the books being collected and being burned. Coming to the poem, The Burning of the Books. When the regime commanded the unlawful books to be burned, teams of dull oxen hauled huge cartloads to the bonfires. Then a banished writer, one of the best, scanning the list of excommunicated texts, became enraged. He had been excluded. He rushed to his desk, full of contemptuous wrath, to write fierce letters to the morons in power. Burn me, he wrote with his blazing pen. Haven't I always reported the truth? Now here you are treating me like a liar. Burn me. So it's a very short poem. It was initially written in German and was translated into English by Michael R. Burke. Now, Burke talks about this poem. I quote him: I take this poem to be Brecht's actual response to Nazi book burnings. Burning a writer's words is like burning him alive at the stake. The fate of many truth tellers at the hand of conformists. What do fascists fear? They fear the truth. So I imagine Brecht to be saying, I have always reported the truth, so burn my words and burn me in the process. But of course, his truthful words have outlived and vastly outshone his enemies' lies. It is possible that he was thinking of some other banished writer, but I suspect that Brecht had himself in mind. He was, after all, that good. So, this is what Michael R. Burke has to say about the poem. He says that this is Brecht's response to the Nazi book burnings, and he, even though he says that it is some other banished writer who writes the letter to the Nazi government, Michael R. Burke feels that it is Brecht himself. He had himself in his mind when he was writing this poem. Now, before we move into the analysis of the poem, we need to understand what censorship is. Censorship is the suppression of speech or public communication or any other information. I'm sure you're all familiar with the censorship with regard to films. So, censorship actually prevents a person from saying some things that he wants to say because the government or the person who censors feels that the material is objectionable, harmful, sensitive, or inconvenient. So, usually, censorship can be conducted by governments, private institutions, or other controlling bodies. Now, there are different kinds of censorships. One is moral censorship, which is the removal of any material that are obscene and any material that we consider to be immoral in nature. For example, pornography is subject to moral censorship. So, that is one kind of censorship that is usually accepted by people everywhere. Another one is political censorship. Political censorship occurs when the governments hold back information from their citizens. And uh, this is one instance where the government tries to exert its control over the people, and they prevent free expression that might foment rebellion. So, political censorship is one where anything related to a particular government or any uh, harmful or sensitive matter relating to a particular government is censored. Religious censorship is the means by which any material considered objectionable by a certain religion is removed. Now, here it involves a dominant religion forcing its limitations on the other religions. Now, alternately, one religion may shun the works of another when they believe the content is not appropriate for their religion. One example of this is the ban that was inserted on Salman Rushdie's works because they believed that it was against the Muslim religion. So that is another example for religious censorship. So here also, Brecht is indirectly talking about a kind of censorship which is exerted by or which is practiced by the Nazi government. Let's come back to the poem. Let's go line by line. When the regime commanded the unlawful books to be burned, teams of dull oxen hauled huge cartloads to the bonfires. So, when the regime commanded, the regime here is undoubtedly the Nazi regime. Okay, when the Nazi regime commanded the unlawful books. What are the unlawful books? The unlawful books here are the books which are against the Nazi government or which are against the Nazi policies. So anything that is Jewish, anything that is socialist or pacifist or anarchist in nature, those were all considered as unlawful books. So the Nazi regime commanded that all the unlawful books, everything that is un-German, should be burned. And he uses this image of teams of dull oxen hauling, carrying huge cartloads to the bonfires. So, teams of dull oxen is used as a figure here, is used as an image here to talk about how the to talk about the intense number of books that have been burnt by the Nazi regime. Moving on to the next stanza. Then, a banished writer, one of the best, scanning the list of excommunicated texts, became enraged. He had been excluded. So, some writers, we understand that some writers have been banished from the Nazi regime. And this particular writer that we have as the persona of this particular poem is also a banished writer, and he is described as one of the best. So definitely, he is someone who has captured the attention of the people. So he scanned the list of excommunicated texts. So he scanned the list of the books that are going to be burned, all the books that were considered as unlawful. So he scanned the list of the excommunicated texts and he becomes enraged. What is the reason for him becoming enraged? Because he had been excluded. He could not find his own book in the list of excommunicated texts. So he becomes enraged, he becomes too angry, and he rushed to his desk, full of contemptuous wrath, to write fierce letters to the morons in power. This seems a little ironic because we know that people who have been banished, they hate censorship, hate censorship, they hate being censored. But this writer, he is enraged that his work is not being burned. We understand the reason a little later. So he goes to his desk, he picks up a paper and a pen to write fierce letters full of blazing fire. Okay, he wants to write letters to the morons in power. He calls the people who are in power, the rulers in the Nazi regime, as morons, as fools. He is full of contemptuous wrath. Okay, he is full of rage. He is too angry. And what does he write in the letter? He writes, "Burn me." He wrote with his blazing pen. "Haven't I always reported the truth? Now here you are treating me like a liar. Burn me." Now, these four lines can be seen as the crux of the entire poem. He writes a letter to the morons in power. He says, "Burn me." He doesn't say, "Burn my book," or he doesn't say, "Burn my work," but he says, "Burn me." We will look at the contrast between "burn me" and "burn my work" a little later. So he says, "Burn me. Haven't I always reported the truth?" So he feels that because he is excluded from the list of excommunicated texts, he feels that he's been projected as a liar. He says that he has always reported the truth. He has written against the government. He has openly shown all the hypocrisy of the government. He has always reported the truth. Now, when they have excluded him from the list of unlawful books, they are treating him like a liar. Because if they have not excluded him, then it means that his truth does not hurt the people in power. So he feels that he's being treated as a liar. And he writes with his blazing pen. He writes, uh, full of rage. He says that, "Burn me." He means that they should burn his book and they should in turn burn him. Now, as I said, the particular writer or the particular persona who is referred to as the banished writer does not say, "Burn my book." He says, "Burn me." Now we understand that in earlier days, political and religious dissenters were burnt at the stake for holding on to their views. The person creating the text and the content of the text are inseparable. That's why we hear the person saying, "Burn me," instead of "burn my book." So this poem can be seen as a protest against censorship and ignorance. It also talks about the reaction of many people to the Nazi policy of burning literature that they disapproved of. So, all those unlawful books, the literature of the Jewish people, the communists, socialists, pacifists, and anarchist authors, all those books that were considered as unlawful were being burnt by the Nazi government. Now, this can also be connected back to the 1933 event of cleansing the German country of all the un-German material. Now, we know that Nazi fascism or Nazi persecution was all based on this purification of the country. They wanted to cleanse the country of all the un-German material. So, this work or this poem can be seen as a protest against censorship and ignorance. One major irony that we find here is that the persona wants to be censored. He is not happy at being excluded from the list of unlawful books. He wants to be censored because he believes that only those books that write the truth are burned. He is disappointed that his book is not among the excommunicated list. He feels betrayed as the government sees his work as unharmful and hence uncensored. And the irony can also be seen where he says, burn me instead of burn my book. Because, as we said before, the person who writes it and the content are inseparable. So, I hope the poem is clear. We talked about the context in which this was written. We talked about the Nazi policy of burning all the un German books, all the books that they thought were harmful to the Nazi regime. We also looked at uh, the contrast between burn me and burn my book. We also looked at this as a protest against censorship and ignorance.